The fluorescent lights hummed in the cramped briefing room at Forward Operating Base Rampart, casting harsh shadows across the faces of 6 Navy SEALs who sat sprawled in folding chairs. The air smelled of gun oil, stale coffee, and the peculiar dust that seemed to permeate everything in eastern Afghanistan. Lieutenant Commander Jake "Hawk" Morrison stood before a topographical map, his weathered face revealing nothing as he studied the terrain of the Korangal Valley, a place the Marines had nicknamed the Valley of Death. His team was restless. They'd been operational for 72 hours straight, running raids on Taliban safe houses with the precision of a surgical scalpel. Now, another mission, another night in the mountains, another chance to bring home a high-value target or end up in a body bag. "Gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation, "we've got a time-sensitive extraction. CIA asset, codenamed Nightingale, has intelligence on an imminent attack. Could be hundreds of civilian casualties if we don't." The door opened with a metallic creak. Every head turned. The conversation died instantly. Staff Sergeant Riley Grant stepped into the room, her frame leaner than the muscular operators around her, but carrying herself with an unmistakable confidence. She wore standard Army combat fatigues, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and over her shoulder hung an M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle that looked like an extension of her body. Her green eyes swept the room once, cataloging faces and attitudes with the same precision she used to calculate windage and elevation. Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Staff Sergeant Grant, you're early." "Punctuality prevents problems, sir," Riley replied evenly, her voice calm and professional. Chief Petty Officer Miguel Torres, a grizzled veteran with 20 years under his belt, leaned back in his chair with exaggerated casualness. Well, they're sending us a babysitter now." His tone dripped with barely concealed disdain. A few chuckles rippled through the team. Riley's expression didn't change. She'd heard worse. Morrison raised a hand, silencing his men. "Staff Sergeant Grant is here as designated Overwatch. Division wants sniper coverage for this extraction, and she's the best shooter they've got in theater." The words were factual, not complimentary. "With all due respect, Commander," Petty Officer Second Class Danny Ghost Reeves spoke up, his southern drawl thick, "we've been running ops in these mountains for 6 months. We know the terrain. We don't need—" "You don't need what, Petty Officer?" Riley interrupted quietly, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "Someone watching your 6, someone who can put rounds on target at 1,000 meters while you're busy not getting shot." The room went dead silent. Ghost's face flushed, but he had no comeback. Morrison suppressed what might have been the ghost of a smile. "As I was saying," he continued, gesturing to the map, "the asset is holed up here, 3 clicks into hostile territory. Intel suggests minimal security, maybe 6 to 8 Taliban fighters in the immediate area. We insert at 200 hours, extract the asset, and we're out before sunrise." Riley moved to the corner of the room without asking permission, her eyes immediately locking onto the terrain map. While Morrison continued his brief, outlining exfil routes, contingency plans, and rows, she studied every contour line, every elevation marker, every potential line of sight. Her mind was already working, calculating fields of fire, identifying vantage points, measuring distances. "The asset has intel on a major attack planned for Kabul," Morrison explained. "We bring him in alive, we potentially save hundreds of lives. Questions?" Petty Officer First Class Brandon Tiny Williams, 6'4" and built like a linebacker, raised a meaty hand. "What about air support?" "Apache on standby 15 to 20 minutes out if we need them, but this is a stealth op, in and out quiet." Morrison's eyes scanned his team. "Anything else?" Riley spoke without looking up from the map. "What's the enemy's typical response time in this sector?" Morrison turned to her, surprised by the tactical question. 10 to 15 minutes if they're organized. Why? Because that ridge, Riley pointed to an elevated position northeast of the target compound, gives overwatch on the entire valley, 800 meters from the LZ. If I'm up there, I can cover your approach, your extraction, and provide early warning if reinforcements move in. Her finger traced potential enemy approach routes. They'll come from here, or here if they come at all. Thermal optics will pick them up 2 clicks out. Torres exchanged a glance with Ghost. The analysis was solid, uncomfortably solid. Morrison studied her for a long moment. You'll observe only, Staff Sergeant. We don't need you playing hero and compromising our position. You see something, you report it. Clear. Crystal clear, sir. Riley's voice betrayed no emotion, but inside she felt the familiar weight of being underestimated. It was a feeling she'd carried since sniper school, where she'd outshot every male competitor and still had to prove herself daily. As the briefing concluded and the team prepared to gear up, Riley remained behind, taking photographs of the map with a small digital camera, memorizing every detail. The SEALs filed out, their conversation resuming in hushed tones just outside the door. $100 says she freezes up, she heard Torres mutter. I say she shoots at shadows and gives away our position, Ghost added. Morrison's voice cut through the gossip. Stow it, both of you. She's on our team for this op, which means she gets the same respect you'd give each other. Am I understood? Yes, sir, came the reluctant chorus. Riley finished her preparations in silence, double-checking her rifle's zero, testing her night vision scope and reviewing her range cards. She'd calculated distances to 17 different points in the valley. Her spotting scope was calibrated. Her ammunition, 175 grain M118 LR rounds, was pristine. 3 hours later, as she stood on the tarmac watching the Black Hawk's rotors spin up, Morrison approached her. The roar of the engines made conversation difficult, so he leaned close to her ear. Listen, Grant, I don't care what you proved in training or on some range somewhere. Out there, he gestured toward the dark mountains, men die when someone tries to be a hero. You observe, you report. You do not engage unless I give explicit authorization. These are my men and I'm responsible for bringing them home. Understood? Riley met his eyes, seeing not just skepticism but genuine concern for his team. She could respect that. Understood, Commander, but with respect, sir. If your men are in danger and I have the shot, I'm taking it. That's my job, bringing soldiers home. Morrison's jaw clenched. Before he could respond, the crew chief signaled it was time to board. As the helicopter lifted off into the Afghan night, Riley stared out at the darkness swallowing the landscape below. The SEALs sat across from her, checking weapons and running last-minute equipment checks. They didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her. That was fine, she didn't need their approval. She just needed to keep them alive. The Korangal Valley loomed ahead, a black void between mountains where men went to kill or die. Riley's hands rested calmly on her rifle. Her heartbeat was steady. Her mind was clear. In 12 hours, these SEALs who dismissed her would owe her their lives. But Riley Grant didn't do this for gratitude. She did it because when warriors whispered for help in the darkness, she answered. Always, the Black Hawk skimmed over the mountain ridges like a predatory bird, flying nap of the earth to avoid detection. Inside the vibrating cabin, red interior lights cast everything in crimson shadows. Riley felt the familiar pre-mission calm settle over her, heart rate dropping, senses sharpening, the world narrowing to mission parameters and geometry. Across from her, the SEALs performed their final checks with practiced efficiency. Torres slapped a fresh magazine into his M4, then touched the St. Christopher medal hanging around his neck. Ghost adjusted his night vision goggles. Tiny double-checked the medical kit strapped to his vest. Morrison sat motionless, eyes closed, breathing steadily. These were men who danced with death so many times they knew its rhythm by heart. The crew chief raised his hand, 2 minutes to insertion. Riley's gloved fingers traced over her equipment one final time. M110 rifle, check. Suppressor, secured. 5 20-round magazines of 175 grain match ammunition, loaded and ready. ANPVS-27 thermal optic, powered and calibrated. Laser rangefinder, functional. Spotting scope, packed. Her ghillie suit was compressed in her pack, ready to transform her into a part of the landscape. Everything she needed to become invisible death. The helicopter banked hard, and Riley's stomach dropped as they descended rapidly into a narrow canyon. Through the open door, she could see nothing but blackness. No lights, no signs of civilization, just the ancient mountains of Afghanistan keeping their secrets. 30 seconds, the crew chief shouted over the rotor wash. The Black Hawk flared hard, its skids barely kissing the rocky ground on a ridge 800 meters above the target village. Riley was first out, moving immediately away from the aircraft as the downdraft whipped dust and debris into a blinding cloud. She dropped prone on the rocks, rifle up, scanning for threats while the SEALs deployed behind her. Then the helicopter was gone, the sound of its rotors fading into the distance, leaving them in the kind of silence that only exists in remote mountains at night, so complete it seemed to have weight and texture. "Overwatch, move to your position," Morrison's voice crackled in her earpiece. "We'll advance on your signal." Riley keyed her mic twice in acknowledgement, no words necessary. She rose into a crouch and began moving up the ridge to her predetermined sniper position. Every step was calculated, avoiding loose rocks that might clatter, testing her weight before committing. The SEALs might doubt her, but they couldn't question her fieldcraft. She moved like smoke. 15 minutes later, Riley settled into a rocky outcrop that offered a commanding view of the entire valley. She arranged her ghillie suit over her body and weapon, breaking up her silhouette against the boulders. The position was perfect: natural cover, multiple escape routes, and clear lines of sight to the target compound below and all approach vectors. She extended her rifle's bipod and nestled the stock against her shoulder, feeling the familiar comfort of the weapon. Through her thermal optic, the world transformed into a palette of heat signatures: cool blues and purples for the landscape, bright yellows and oranges for anything warm-blooded. "Overwatch in position," she whispered into her comms, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Copy, Overwatch. We're moving," Morrison replied. Riley watched as 6 thermal signatures emerged from their concealment point 400 meters to her west. The SEALs moved in a tactical formation, weapons up, each man covering a different sector. Their movement was fluid, professional. She could see why they had such confidence in themselves. They flowed through the terrain like water, using every fold in the ground, every shadow, every piece of cover. Her job now was to be their guardian angel, to see what they couldn't, to watch the bigger picture while they focused on their immediate surroundings. Through her scope, Riley scanned methodically. The target compound sat in a small valley, a typical Afghan dwelling: mud brick walls, flat roof, a few outbuildings. 2 heat signatures inside, one of them likely their asset, Nightingale. The compound appeared quiet. Too quiet perhaps, but not yet alarming. She expanded her scan to the surrounding area, dividing the valley into sectors and clearing each one systematically. This was where hours of training became muscle memory: pattern recognition, threat assessment, distance calculation, all happening simultaneously in her mind. Then she saw them. 2 thermal signatures, 300 meters northeast of the SEAL team's route, moving in a patrol pattern. Riley's heart rate accelerated slightly as she calculated trajectories. The patrol's path would intersect with the SEALs in approximately 90 seconds. "Phantom 6, hold position." Riley's voice was calm but urgent. 2 hostiles, you're 11 o'clock, 300 meters moving south on patrol route. They'll cross your path in 90 seconds. Below, the 6 thermal signatures that were Morrison's team froze instantly, melting into whatever cover they could find. Riley centered her crosshairs on the lead enemy fighter, tracking his movement. Distance, 647 meters. Wind, negligible. Temperature, cool air stable. She could take the shot, drop both targets before they knew what hit them. But Morrison had been clear: observe, don't engage. Can you confirm they'll pass without detecting us? Morrison whispered. Riley watched the patrol's route, calculating angles and sight lines with practiced precision. Affirmative. If you hold position for 2 minutes, they'll pass 40 meters north of you. They're not actively searching, just routine patrol. Copy, we're ghosts. Riley barely breathed as she watched the scene unfold. The 2 Taliban fighters walked casually, AK-47s slung over their shoulders, completely unaware that 6 of America's deadliest warriors were hidden in the shadows less than 50 meters away. One of them lit a cigarette, the brief flare of light visible even without optics. They passed within 40 meters, exactly as Riley had predicted, their voices carrying faintly on the night air, casual conversation, something about tea and complaints about the cold. Then they were gone, disappearing around a rocky outcrop. Clear to move, Riley reported. Good eyes, Overwatch, Morrison acknowledged, and this time there was a note of genuine respect in his voice. The SEALs continued their approach. Riley watched them close the distance to the compound, 400 meters, 300 meters, 200 meters. Everything was proceeding perfectly. The mission seemed almost too easy. That's when Riley's blood turned to ice. She'd been scanning the northern ridgeline when her thermal optic picked up something that made her stomach clench. Heat signatures. Multiple heat signatures. Not 2 or 3, but dozens of them, moving with tactical purpose along 3 separate ridge lines. She zoomed in, counting rapidly, her trained eye distinguishing between individual fighters. 8 here, 12 there. Another group of 20 moving through a wadi to the east, all of them converging on the valley from different directions, establishing a perimeter. This wasn't a random patrol. This was a coordinated movement, a trap. Riley's mind raced through the implications. The CIA asset was either compromised or bait. The enemy knew the SEALs were coming. They'd let them insert, let them get close to the target, and now they were systematically surrounding the valley to cut off any escape. Her count reached 40 confirmed fighters, and more were still appearing on her scope like ghosts materializing from the mountains themselves. Heavy weapons, too. She could see the distinctive heat signature of PKM machine guns, and those tube-shaped thermal blooms could only be RPGs. Phantom 6, Riley's voice cut through the comms, still controlled but with unmistakable urgency. You need to abort. Now. You've got company, multiple groups converging on your position from 3 directions. There was a pause, then Morrison's voice tight with tension. How many, Overwatch? Riley swept her scope across the valley one more time, updating her count. What she saw made her mouth go dry. At least 40 hostiles, heavily armed, moving to surround the valley. This is an ambush, Commander. They knew you were coming. Another pause. Longer this time. Riley could imagine Morrison weighing his options, abort and lose the intelligence that could save hundreds of lives, or continue and risk his entire team in what was clearly a trap. We're too close to turn back, Morrison finally said. We're going for the asset. Overwatch, I need you to be my eyes. Call out every threat you see. Riley's jaw clenched. She just told him it was a trap and he was walking into it anyway, but she understood. These men didn't leave missions unfinished. They didn't leave assets behind. Copy that, Phantom 6. I've got you covered. As the SEALs moved the final 100 meters to the compound, Riley watched the enemy forces continue to tighten their noose. They were patient, professional, waiting for the perfect moment to spring their trap. She counted ammunition, 5 magazines, 20 rounds each, 100 rounds total. 40+ enemy fighters. The math was brutal. But Riley had never been good at accepting limitations. Her finger rested gently on the trigger guard as she tracked the closest enemy group. When this went bad, and it would go bad, she'd be ready. The valley held its breath, waiting for violence to shatter the silence. The seals reached the compound wall without incident, stacking up beside the wooden door in perfect formation. Riley watched through her scope as Morrison signaled his team, 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. They breached with practiced efficiency, the door splintering under Tiny's boot as the team flowed inside like water through a crack. Compound secure, Morrison's voice came through the comms 30 seconds later. Asset located, we have Nightingale. Riley exhaled slightly. So far, so good. But the enemy forces were still moving, still tightening the noose. On her thermal scope, she tracked their positions, groups of fighters establishing positions on the high ground, setting up fields of fire that would turn the valley floor into a killing zone. Phantom 6 enemy forces are in position, Riley reported, her voice steady despite the dread building in her chest. You need to exfil now. They're waiting for something. Copy, moving to. The night exploded. An RPG streaked from the northern ridge, its rocket motor leaving a bright tail of fire across Riley's night vision. The projectile slammed into the compound's outer wall with a thunderous detonation that Riley felt in her chest, even from 800 meters away. The blast was the signal. Suddenly, the entire valley lit up with muzzle flashes as 40-plus fighters opened fire simultaneously. Contact! Contact from all sides! Morrison's voice shouted over the comms, barely audible over the staccato crack of automatic weapons fire. Riley watched in horror as tracer rounds, every 5th bullet glowing red-hot, converged on the compound from 3 directions like deadly meteor showers. The SEALs' return fire was disciplined and accurate, but they were catastrophically outnumbered and pinned down. Through her scope, Riley saw a SEAL, Ghost, judging by his size, take a round to the shoulder and spin backward behind the compound wall. Another fighter moved to pull him to cover. One wounded, someone shouted over the comms, sounded like Tor's. Make that 2, Tiny's voice strained with pain. Caught shrapnel in the leg, still operational. Riley's mind shifted into combat mode. She began acquiring targets, her scope sweeping across the enemy positions, calculating distances and windage for each one. Her finger rested on the trigger, every muscle in her body coiled like a spring. But Morrison's orders had been clear, observe only. Even as she watched his men dying. Air support inbound, Morrison called out. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes, an eternity in a firefight. Riley watched a group of Taliban fighters maneuvering to flank the compound from the east, using a dry creek bed for cover. They moved with tactical proficiency. Someone had trained these fighters well. Once they reached that position, they'd have a clear angle into the compound. The SEALs would be completely exposed. Another RPG launched, this one closer. The explosion sent a shower of mud bricks and debris raining down on the compound. Riley could hear the concussion through her comms, followed by coughing and shouted commands. Ammunition check, Morrison ordered, his voice tight with controlled urgency. The responses came back rapid fire, 4 mags, 3 left, down to 2. They were burning through ammunition too fast, and the enemy seemed to have an endless supply. More fighters were still arriving, their heat signatures appearing on Riley's scope like malevolent stars. Riley watched Ghost try to return fire with his good arm, but another burst forced him back down. Blood stained the dirt around him. She could see it as dark patches even through thermal imaging. Tiny was applying a tourniquet to his own leg while simultaneously providing covering fire. These men were fighting with everything they had. But it wasn't enough. A PKM machine gun opened up from a rooftop 400 meters north of the compound, its sustained fire chewing through the mud brick walls like a chainsaw. Dust and debris filled the air. The SEALs were trapped, pinned in place by overwhelming firepower. "Where's that air support?" Tors shouted over the comms. 12 minutes out, Morrison responded. 12 minutes they didn't have. Riley watched as the flanking element reached their position in the creek bed. 3 fighters with RPGs were setting up, taking aim at the compound's weakest wall. If those rockets hit home, they'd kill everyone inside. Her crosshairs found the first RPG gunner. Distance, 647 meters. Wind, 2 miles per hour left to right. Elevation adjusted. The shot was clear. She could take it. But Morrison's orders. Phantom 6, you have 3 RPGs preparing to fire from your eastern flank creek bed position, Riley reported, her voice remarkably calm. If they fire simultaneously, your position is compromised. Understood, can't maneuver without exposing wounded. Morrison's breathing was labored. He'd been hit too, nothing critical but enough to slow him down. Options. Riley stared through her scope at the enemy fighters. They were lining up their shots, adjusting their aim. 5 seconds, maybe 10, before they fired. This was the moment, the line in the sand. Follow orders and watch good men die or break protocol and save their lives. It wasn't even a choice. I can eliminate the threat, Riley said quietly. Negative Overwatch. Do not compromise your position. Wheel. With respect, sir, your men are dying. I have the shot. Silence on the comms. 1 second. 2 seconds. The RPG gunner's fingers tightened on their triggers. Overwatch, you are cleared to engage targets of opportunity. Make them count. But Riley had already made her decision. Her first shot was already breaking before Morrison finished speaking. The suppressed rifle coughed, barely louder than a hard cough. Through her scope, she saw the first RPG gunner's head snap back, the weapon clattering from his hands. She'd already acquired her second target before the first body hit the ground. But before she could fire again, everything went to hell. Someone in the enemy forces had spotted her muzzle flash. Suddenly, rounds were snapping through the air around her position, ricocheting off rocks with angry whines. Chunks of stone exploded near her head. They'd found her. Riley rolled left, abandoning her primary position, dragging her rifle with her. She found cover behind a larger boulder as automatic weapons fire chewed up the spot where she'd been lying 2 seconds earlier. Overwatch report, Morrison shouted. I'm compromised, Riley called back, breathing hard. They've got my position. The situation had gone from critical to catastrophic. The SEALs were pinned in the compound, low on ammunition, with 2 wounded. Air support was still 10 minutes out. And now Riley was taking direct fire, unable to provide overwatch. She risked a glance around the boulder. Dozens of muzzle flashes lit up the darkness. The entire enemy force was converging on both her position and the compound simultaneously. They were going to overrun the SEALs through sheer numbers. Riley's radio crackled with the sounds of desperate combat, magazines being changed, wounded men groaning. Morrison shouting orders, trying to organize a defense that was falling apart. Then she heard Ghost cry out, another hit, his 3rd wound. Man down, Ghost is hit bad. Tor's voice was raw with fear and rage. I'm out, someone else shouted, Reeves maybe. Winchester, Winchester. Winchester, the code word every warrior dreaded, out of ammunition. Riley pressed her back against the boulder, rounds still snapping overhead. She had 4 magazines left, 80 rounds, at least 35 enemy fighters still operational, probably more. Her hand moved to her rifle, muscle memory taking over. She could hear Morrison trying to organize a final defensive perimeter, trying to buy time for air support that might arrive too late. Then, through the chaos of gunfire and explosions, through the screaming and the dying, Riley heard something that stopped her cold. Morrison's voice, barely audible, stripped of all command authority, reduced to the most human of pleas. Overwatch, if you can hear us, send help. Not a tactical request, not an order, a prayer from a man who knew he was about to watch his brothers die and could do nothing to stop it. The sounds of the firefight continued. The mechanical chatter of AK-47s, the deeper boom of the PKM, men shouting in Pashto, closing in for the kill. The SEALs' return fire was sporadic now, desperate shots from men down to their last magazines. Riley's jaw set with granite determination. Her fear evaporated, replaced by cold, calculated purpose. She'd spent 10,000 hours at the range for this moment. Every simulation, every training scenario, every sleepless night studying ballistics and wind tables, it had all led here. Phantom 6, Riley's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, cold and sharp and absolutely certain. Help is already here. Keep their heads down. She rolled out from behind the boulder into a new firing position, rifle up, scope to eye. Rounds snapped past her head. She ignored them. Her breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to crosshairs and calculations. The enemy thought they'd won. Thought it was just a matter of time before they overran 6 wounded, ammunition-depleted SEALs. They were wrong. Riley Grant had 80 rounds, and the skill to make every single one count. And she was about to teach 40 Taliban fighters the difference between a soldier and a weapon of precision death. Riley's first target materialized in her scope, an enemy fighter positioning an RPG launcher on a rooftop 647 meters northeast of the compound. He was taking his time, confident in his numerical superiority, adjusting his aim to put a rocket directly into the SEAL's position. He would never get the chance. Riley controlled her breathing, 3 deep breaths, then halfway out on the third. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger. Wind, negligible. Temperature, cooling, air density stable. Earth's rotation, minimal effect at this range but calculated anyway. Every variable accounted for, every factor measured. The crosshairs settled on the fighter's center mass. Riley's world reduced to a single point of focus. Squeeze. The suppressed rifle coughed. Through her scope, Riley saw the impact. The fighter's body jerked backward as the 175-grain bullet struck his chest at 2,580 feet per second. The RPG clattered from his hands, unfired. His companion turned, confused, looking for the threat. Riley was already acquiring her second target. The companion raised his AK-47, scanning wildly. Distance, 658 meters. Wind, unchanged. Riley's crosshairs found his upper torso. Squeeze. The fighter crumpled, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the air as he fell. 2 down, 30 to go. Overwatch, was that you? Morrison's voice held disbelief. Riley didn't respond. No time. Her hands moved with mechanical precision. Chamber, acquire, fire. A machine gunner on the northern ridge, 712 meters, laying down, suppressing fire on the compound. Riley put a round through his shoulder, spinning him away from his weapon. The PKM went silent. 3 down. She shifted position, rolling 3 meters to her left behind a different outcrop. Enemy fire had intensified around her last location, rounds sparking off rocks. They knew generally where she was but couldn't pinpoint her exact position. That confusion was her advantage. A group of 4 fighters was advancing on the compound from the western wadi, moving in tactical bounds, one covering while others moved. Professional, disciplined, it didn't matter. Riley tracked the lead fighter. Distance, 589 meters. Slight crosswind now, maybe 3 miles per hour. She compensated. Squeeze. He dropped. The others froze, looking for cover. Riley's next round caught the second fighter before he could dive behind a rock. The remaining 2 scattered, their advance broken. 5 down. What the hell is happening up there? Tors shouted over the comms. They're dropping like flies. Riley's response was clipped, emotionless. Keeping you alive, Chief. 13 down, keep your heads on a swivel. 13. The SEALs exchanged stunned glances in the compound below. They'd only heard 5 or 6 shots. Riley had shifted positions again, finding a small depression that gave her a different angle on the battlefield. Her body was coated in dust and small rock fragments from near misses, but her hands were steady as stone. She wasn't thinking about the men she was killing. Couldn't afford to. They were geometry problems. Distance, wind, elevation. Solve the equation, squeeze the trigger, move to the next problem. An enemy commander, she could tell by the way others deferred to him, was trying to rally his forces near a cluster of buildings 700 meters south. He was shouting orders, pointing toward the compound, organizing another assault. Leadership target, high priority. Riley's crosshairs found him. She led him slightly as he gestured, accounting for his movement. Squeeze. He went down mid-sentence. The fighters around him dove for cover, their coordinated assault dissolving into confusion. 7 down. A technical truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed was racing toward the compound from the east, bouncing over the rough terrain. The gunner was already firing, tracers arcing through the darkness. That .50 caliber would tear through the compound walls like paper. Riley calculated the shot in microseconds, moving target, distance, 823 meters and closing, speed, approximately 30 miles per hour, lead time 2 meters. She tracked the driver's side of the windshield, leading the truck's movement. Squeeze. The driver slumped over the wheel. The truck swerved violently, flipped onto its side and crashed into a ravine. The gunner was thrown clear, tumbling across the ground. Riley's follow-up shot ended his attempt to crawl to safety. 9 down. Overwatch, you are a goddamn artist, Morrison breathed into the radio. Below, the SEALs were reorganizing, using the breathing room Riley had created to redistribute ammunition, treat wounds, and establish better defensive positions. But Riley barely heard him. She'd entered a state that snipers called the zone, a place of absolute focus where time seemed to slow, where the chaos of battle became a series of clear, distinct problems to solve. Her mind processed information faster than conscious thought, threat assessment, prioritization, ballistic calculation, all happening simultaneously. A group of 3 fighters was attempting to flank the compound from the south, using a stone wall for cover. Riley waited, patient as death itself, until all 3 were exposed. First shot, second shot, third shot, 3 seconds, 3 bodies. 12 down. The enemy was panicking now. She could see it in their movements, the hesitation, the wild firing at shadows, fighters breaking from cover and running. They couldn't see her, couldn't find her, couldn't understand where death was coming from. Their carefully planned ambush was collapsing into chaos. Riley shifted positions again, moving with the fluidity of smoke. She found a new nest behind a wind-carved rock formation that offered excellent concealment and multiple firing lanes. Her rifle was hot from sustained fire, but well within operational parameters. She had 3 magazines left, 60 rounds. More than enough. An RPG team was setting up on the eastern ridge, trying to target her general area with indirect fire. Amateur mistake. Using explosives to hunt a sniper just gave away their position. Riley's scope found them. The loader was kneeling, preparing another rocket. The gunner was taking aim. Squeeze loader down. The gunner dropped the RPG launcher and grabbed for his rifle. Squeeze, too late. 14 down. A fighter in a white turban, probably a mid-level commander, was trying to organize a retreat, waving his arms and shouting at his men. Riley watched him through her scope for 3 seconds, letting him believe he might succeed. Then she ended that hope with 175 grains of copper-jacketed lead. 15 down. Contact left, Tors shouted from the compound. A group of fighters had gotten within 50 meters of the western wall, using the confusion to advance under covering fire. Riley swept her scope left, found them. 4 fighters in a tight group moving fast. She led the first one, compensated for his running speed. Squeeze, he tumbled. The others stopped, looking for cover. Fatal mistake. Riley's next 3 shots came in rapid succession. Chamber, acquire, fire, chamber, acquire, fire. 19 down. The SEAL's defensive fire picked up as Riley created opportunities. Every fighter she dropped left others exposed, vulnerable. It was becoming a symphony of violence with Riley as the conductor, each shot creating cascading effects across the battlefield. She spotted movement on the northern ridge, 2 fighters attempting to recover the abandoned PKM machine gun. They thought they could remount the weapon, re-establish fire superiority. Riley let them get their hands on it, let them start to believe they might succeed. Then she shattered that belief along with the first fighter's skull at 734 meters. The second man turned to run. Riley's bullet caught him between the shoulder blades. 21 down. Her second magazine clicked empty. Riley ejected it smoothly, seated her third magazine, chambered a round. The entire reload took 3 seconds. She never took her eyes off the battlefield. A pair of fighters was dragging a wounded comrade toward safety, breaking from cover to reach him. Riley watched them through her scope, her crosshairs steady. The humanitarian part of her brain noted they were brave men, trying to save a friend. The warrior part of her brain noted they were enemy combatants, armed, dangerous, and currently exposed. Squeeze, squeeze. 23 down. The air support would arrive in 4 minutes, but Riley wasn't waiting for air support. She was ending this now, one precisely calculated shot at a time. The enemy force that had numbered over 40 was being systematically dismantled by a single shooter they couldn't see, couldn't find, couldn't stop. 3 fighters remained in her immediate sector, the ones who hadn't already fled into the mountains. They huddled behind a low wall, weapons abandoned, clearly terrified. One of them risked a glance over the wall, looking toward the compound. Riley's crosshairs found him. Squeeze. 24 down. The remaining 2 broke and ran, racing toward a distant ridge. Riley tracked the first runner, led him by 3 body lengths at 680 meters. Squeeze. 25 down. The last fighter was sprinting desperately, abandoning his weapon, his ammunition, everything but the burning need to escape the invisible death hunting him. He was 200 meters from cover, running for his life. Riley's crosshairs followed him effortlessly. She could see his terror in every stumbling step. Her finger rested on the trigger. 26. Riley's finger remained steady on the trigger as she tracked the fleeing fighter through her scope. He was running in pure panic now, stumbling over rocks, his white dishdasha flapping behind him like a surrender flag. Distance, 702 meters and increasing. Heart rate elevated from running, harder shot. Wind picking up slightly, compensation required. The crosshairs settled on his back, between the shoulder blades. Riley controlled her breathing, found the natural pause between heartbeats. Squeeze. The runner's legs gave out mid-stride. He pitched forward and didn't move again. 26 confirmed kills. Riley chambered her final round from the third magazine and swept her scope across the valley one last time, searching for additional threats. The battlefield had transformed from a coordinated ambush into a graveyard. Bodies lay scattered across the terrain in the precise positions where her bullets had found them. The survivors, she estimated maybe 8 to 10 fighters, had abandoned their weapons and fled into the distant mountains, their silhouettes disappearing into the darkness. The valley fell silent except for the wind whistling through the rocks and the distant thump of approaching helicopters. Overwatch, what's your status? Morrison's voice came through, heavy with exhaustion and disbelief. 26 confirmed neutralized, Commander, Riley responded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to fade from her system. Remaining hostiles have broken contact and retreated. Your path to the LZ is clear. Silence on the comms. Then Tor's voice rough with emotion. Did she just say 26? Riley safeguarded her weapon, ejecting the magazine and clearing the chamber. Her hands moved through the process automatically while her eyes continued to scan the valley. The professional part of her brain was already conducting the after-action review: shots fired, hits confirmed, ammunition expenditure, position compromises. But another part of her, the part she usually kept buried deep, was beginning to process what she'd just done. 26 men. 26 human beings who'd been alive 15 minutes ago. She pushed the thought away. Not now. Later, in the darkness of her bunk, she could examine her conscience. Right now, 6 Americans were alive because of what she'd done. That math was simple, even if the morality was complex. "Overwatch, we're moving to extract the wounded," Morrison called. "Can you provide cover during movement to LZ?" Riley shifted to a new position, finding an angle that covered the extraction route. Through her scope, she watched the SEALs emerge from the compound. Ghost was being carried by Tors and Tiny, who was limping badly on his shrapnel-wounded leg but refused to slow down. Morrison had his left arm pressed against his side, a broken rib, maybe 2, from a near miss. Reeves was burned across his left shoulder from an RPG blast that had come too close. They were battered, bloody, and moving like men who'd been through hell, but they were moving. They were alive. Riley tracked their progress through her scope, her finger resting on the trigger guard, ready to engage any threat that emerged. But the valley remained empty except for the wind and the dead. The SEALs reached the LZ, a flat stretch of ground 400 meters from the compound, and immediately set up a defensive perimeter. The CIA asset, a thin Afghan man in traditional clothing, stayed close to Morrison, his eyes wide with shock at the carnage surrounding them. The Apache gunships arrived first, their thermal targeting system sweeping the valley for targets. Finding none, Riley had already done their job for them. They established a high cover position. Then came the Black Hawks, rotors beating the air into submission as they descended toward the LZ. "Overwatch exfil is inbound," Morrison called. "What's your ETA to LZ?" Riley was already moving, breaking down her position with practiced efficiency. She secured her rifle, shouldered her pack, and began descending the rocky slope toward the extraction point. Every muscle in her body ached from maintaining shooting positions for the past 20 minutes, but she moved quickly, efficiently. The first Black Hawk touched down and the SEALs began loading their wounded. Tors kept looking toward the ridge where Riley had been positioned, searching for her in the darkness. Ghost, despite his wounds, insisted on staying conscious, his good hand gripping his rifle even as medics worked on him. Riley was 200 meters from the LZ when Morrison's voice crackled again. "Negative on departure. We don't leave anyone behind. We wait for Overwatch." Something in Riley's chest tightened at those words. They'd wait for her. These men who doubted her, dismissed her, thought she'd be a liability. They were refusing to leave without her. She picked up her pace, half running down the rocky slope. The Black Hawk's rotors created a dust storm, limiting visibility, but Riley navigated by memory and instinct. She emerged from the darkness like a wraith, rifle slung across her back, her uniform covered in dust and small tears from ricochets, her face streaked with camouflage paint and sweat. Morrison stood at the helicopter's door, refusing to board until he saw her. When Riley materialized from the dust cloud, he extended his hand, gripping her forearm and pulling her aboard with surprising strength for a wounded man. The helicopter lifted off immediately, banking hard away from the valley. Riley collapsed onto the bench seat, her rifle across her lap, and for the first time in 30 minutes, she allowed herself to fully breathe. Tors sat across from her, his uniform soaked with Ghost's blood and his own sweat. He stared at Riley for a long moment, then slowly removed his SEAL trident pin from his vest. He leaned forward, offering it to her with both hands, a gesture of profound respect. "Ma'am," he said, his voice hoarse, "you earned this tonight. You're one of us." Riley looked at the golden pin, the eagle clutching a trident, pistol, and anchor that represented everything the SEALs stood for. She understood the weight of what Tors was offering. This wasn't just a pin. It was acceptance into a brotherhood that few ever achieved. She reached out and gently closed Tor's hand around the trident, pushing it back toward him. "I'm honored, Chief, truly, but I'm not a SEAL. I'm a soldier who did her job." She managed a small, tired smile. "Besides, you might need that. I hear those pins are expensive to replace." Tors laughed, a short, exhausted bark of genuine amusement. "Could have fooled us, ma'am. What you did out there." He shook his head, struggling for words. "I've been doing this for 20 years. Never seen shooting like that. Never." Ghost stirred on his stretcher, his pain medication beginning to kick in, but his mind still sharp enough to speak. "How many?" he asked quietly, his southern drawl thick. "How many did you drop?" Riley met his eyes. 26 confirmed. The helicopter fell silent except for the rotor noise. The number hung in the air, almost incomprehensible. 26 precision kills in approximately 20 minutes of sustained combat. Tiny whistled low. "Jesus Christ, you weren't shooting, you were conducting a symphony." Morrison leaned back against the helicopter's wall, his hand pressed against his injured ribs. He studied Riley with new eyes, not the skepticism from the briefing room, but genuine respect mixed with something like awe. "You saved our lives, Staff Sergeant," he said simply. "All of us, we were done. Ammunition almost gone, air support still minutes out, wounded." He paused, his jaw tightening with emotion. "We were done, and then you became our guardian angel." Riley didn't know what to say to that. She'd spent her entire career being underestimated, having to prove herself again and again. And now these warriors, men who represented the pinnacle of special operations, were looking at her like she was something beyond human. But she didn't feel extraordinary. She felt tired. Her hands, which had been rock steady during the firefight, now trembled slightly with fatting adrenaline. The weight of 26 kills was beginning to settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. Riley's voice was quieter than usual. "I just did what needed to be done. You would have done the same for me." "Maybe," Morrison said, "but we didn't have to, you did, and we owe you everything." Reeves, the youngest of the SEALs, spoke up from his position near the door. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" When Riley nodded, he continued. "When we were pinned down, when Morrison called for help, were you scared?" Riley considered the question honestly. "Terrified," she admitted. "I thought I was about to watch 6 good men die and there was nothing I could do about it." She paused. "But fear doesn't matter. The mission matters. You mattered. So I did my job." The Apache escort flew alongside them, and through the window, Riley could see the valley receding into darkness below. Somewhere down there, 26 bodies lay cooling in the Afghan night. 26 men who tried to kill American soldiers. 26 fathers, brothers, sons who'd never go home. Riley closed her eyes, letting the helicopter's vibration wash over her. She'd examine her conscience later. For now, 6 Americans were alive. Intelligence that would save hundreds had been secured, and she'd proven, at least to these men, that she belonged on the battlefield. Tors was still watching her, that SEAL trident still in his hand. Finally, he tucked it back into his vest pocket. "You know what, ma'am? You don't need this pin. What you did tonight speaks louder than any piece of metal ever could." Riley nodded, accepting the compliment silently. As the helicopter carried them toward safety, toward debriefing, toward whatever came next, Riley allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. She'd answered when warriors called for help. And she'd brought them all home. The Black Hawk carved through the Afghan night, its rotors beating a steady rhythm that seemed to echo Riley's heartbeat. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the firefight was draining away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to pull her under. She sat with her rifle across her lap, her fingers still resting on the weapon as if letting go would somehow undo everything that had just happened. Across from her, the SEALs were going through their own post-combat rituals. Torres methodically cleaned Ghost's blood from his hands with a rag, his movements mechanical. Tiny had his head tilted back, eyes closed, though whether from pain medication or simply exhaustion, Riley couldn't tell. Reeves stared out the open door at the darkness rushing past, his burned shoulder freshly bandaged by the crew's medic. Morrison caught Riley's eye and nodded toward Ghost, who was drifting in and out of consciousness on the stretcher. "He's going to make it," Morrison said, having to shout over the rotor noise. "Thanks to you buying us time." Riley nodded but said nothing. Words felt inadequate, hollow. She'd killed 26 men tonight. The number kept circling in her mind like a vulture. 26 precise shots. 26 bodies left cooling in that valley. She'd trained for this, prepared for this, but nothing truly prepared you for the reality of taking human life on that scale. "Hey," Torres leaned forward, his weathered face serious. "You good, Staff Sergeant?" Was she good? Riley wasn't sure anymore. Her hands had stopped shaking, but something else was settling in, not regret exactly, but a profound weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. She met Tor's eyes and saw understanding there. He'd been in combat for 2 decades. He knew what she was feeling. "I'm operational chief," Riley replied, the military answer automatic. Tor studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "That's not what I asked, but I hear you." He leaned back. "First time you dropped that many in one engagement." Riley nodded. Her previous record had been 4 targets in a single operation, a clean counter-sniper mission in Iraq. This was different. This was industrial-scale precision killing. "Listen to me," Tor said, his voice dropping to just above the rotor noise. "What you did tonight, that wasn't murder, that wasn't some rampage. You saved 6 American lives, you stopped a terrorist cell. You did exactly what you were trained to do when it mattered most." He paused. "The weight you're feeling right now, that's what makes you human, that's what makes you one of the good guys. The day this doesn't bother you is the day you need to hang up your rifle." Riley absorbed his words, finding a strange comfort in them. Morrison was listening too, his expression thoughtful. "He's right," Morrison added. "I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between a warrior and a killer. Warriors feel the weight, they carry it, but they don't let it stop them from doing what's necessary." He shifted, wincing at his injured ribs. "You're a warrior, Staff Sergeant Grant. Don't ever doubt that." The CIA asset, Khalid, had been silent throughout the flight, clutching a data drive that contained the intelligence they'd extracted him for. Now he spoke up, his English accented but clear. "The woman's soldier. She killed many men tonight." 26, Tiny said, his voice carrying a note of pride. 26 Taliban fighters who were about to kill all of us. Khalid looked at Riley with something approaching reverence. "In my village, there are stories of warrior women from ancient times, fierce protectors who defended their people with unmatched skill." He placed his hand over his heart in a gesture of respect. "Tonight, I saw such a warrior. You have my gratitude and the gratitude of everyone who will live because you stopped those men." Riley felt her throat tighten. She hadn't thought about it that way, about the lives saved beyond just the 6 men in this helicopter. The intelligence Khalid carried would prevent an attack. Hundreds of potential victims who would never know how close they'd come to death, never know that a female army sniper in the mountains of Afghanistan had changed their fate with 26 precisely placed bullets. "Thank you," Riley managed to say, "but I was just doing your job," Torres interrupted with a knowing smile. "Yeah, we've heard that line. You know what? Sometimes just doing your job saves the world. Don't diminish what you did." The helicopter began its descent toward Fob Rampart. Through the open door, Riley could see the base's lights creating a small island of illumination in the vast darkness. Home. Safety. A place to finally let her guard down. The landing was smooth. As soon as the skids touched the ground, medical personnel swarmed the helicopter. Ghost was carefully transferred to a stretcher and rushed toward the medical facility, doctors already shouting orders. Tiny tried to walk on his own but was quickly supported by two corpsmen who weren't taking no for an answer. Riley stepped out of the helicopter onto solid ground, her legs unsteady after the adrenaline crash. Morrison was beside her immediately, his hand on her shoulder, not to steady her but in solidarity. "Debriefing in 90 minutes, he said. "Get cleaned up, get some food if you can stomach it. Then we tell the brass what happened out there." Riley nodded, but before she could walk away, Morrison's grip tightened slightly. She turned to face him. "I owe you an apology," Morrison said, his voice barely audible now that they were away from the helicopter. "Back in that briefing room, I treated you like a liability, like someone who'd compromised my team. I was wrong, dead wrong. You didn't just save our lives tonight, you showed me that real warriors come in all forms, from all branches, from all backgrounds." He extended his hand formally. "It was an honor to serve with you, Staff Sergeant Grant." Riley shook his hand, feeling the strength in his grip despite his injuries. "The honor was mine, Commander. Your team fought like lions. I just gave you the breathing room to do what you do best." Torres appeared beside them, having supervised Ghost's transfer to medical. "The boys want to know if you'll join us for a drink after debriefing. Nothing fancy, just the team in our hooch, swapping stories." He grinned. "Fair warning, we're probably going to talk about you like you're not there, even when you are." Riley found herself smiling, her first genuine smile since the mission began. "I'd like that, Chief. I'd like that a lot." As the SEALs dispersed toward medical checkups in their quarters, Riley stood alone on the tarmac for a moment, breathing in the cool night air. Her rifle felt heavier than usual, as if the 26 kills had added physical weight to the weapon. She unslung it, cradling it in her arms like the deadly tool it was. Around her, the fob hummed with activity. Humvees moving between buildings, generators maintaining power, soldiers going about the endless tasks that kept a forward base operational. Normal life, continuing despite the violence that had erupted just 30 kilometers away. Riley looked up at the stars, the same stars that shone over that valley where 26 men lay dead. She thought about their families, who would soon receive devastating news. She thought about the SEALs, who would go home to their families because she'd been there. She thought about the hundreds of people in Kabul who would wake up tomorrow, unaware that their lives had been saved by events in a dark valley. The moral mathematics of war were never simple, but tonight, at least, the equation was clear. She'd chosen to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She'd answered when desperate warriors called for help. She'd brought them home. That would have to be enough. Riley shouldered her rifle and walked toward the armory to secure her weapon. Behind her, the Black Hawk's rotors began to wind down, the sound fading into the ambient noise of the base. The mission was over. The real work processing what had happened, living with what she'd done, carrying the weight of those 26 lives, was just beginning. But Riley, Grant had never shied away from hard work. And she wasn't about to start now. Riley stood in the armory, methodically field-stripping her M110 under harsh fluorescent lights. Her hands moved through the familiar ritual: remove magazine, clear chamber, disassemble upper receiver, clean bolt carrier group. Each piece was examined, cleaned, and inspected with the kind of attention that bordered on meditative. The rifle had performed flawlessly tonight. 26 shots, 26 kills, 0 malfunctions. It deserved proper respect. "Staff Sergeant Grant," a voice interrupted her concentration. Riley looked up to find a young corporal standing nervously in the doorway. "Colonel Hendricks wants to see you in the TOC. Now, ma'am." The Tactical Operations Center. Command wanted answers, and they wanted them immediately. Riley reassembled her weapon in under 2 minutes, secured it in the armory's vault, and headed across the base. The night air was cooler now, approaching the cold hours before dawn. Soldiers she passed stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Word had already spread through the base about what happened in the valley. The military rumor mill worked faster than any communications system. The TOC was buzzing with activity when Riley entered. Large screens displayed satellite imagery of the valley, thermal overlays showing the positions of bodies, her handiwork rendered in stark digital clarity. Officers clustered around terminals, analyzing data, writing reports. The atmosphere was electric with the kind of energy that followed a major engagement. Colonel Robert Hendricks stood at the center of it all, a career officer with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in combat zones. Beside him stood Morrison, cleaned up but still favoring his injured ribs, and Captain Sarah Chen, the intelligence officer who'd originally briefed the mission. "Staff Sergeant Grant, reporting as ordered, sir," Riley announced, standing at attention. Hendricks turned, his steel-gray eyes assessing her. "At ease, Staff Sergeant," he gestured to the screens. "I've been reviewing Commander Morrison's preliminary report and the drone footage from tonight's operation. 26 confirmed kills, single shooter, approximately 20 minutes of sustained precision fire." He paused. "That's not just impressive, that's unprecedented." Riley remained silent, unsure what response was appropriate. Chen stepped forward, tablet in hand. "The enemy force you eliminated was part of a larger cell we've been tracking for months. The cell leader was among your kills. We've confirmed his identity through facial recognition. You didn't just save 6 operators tonight, Staff Sergeant. You decapitated an entire terrorist network that was planning attacks across 3 provinces." "With respect, ma'am," Riley said carefully, "I was just providing overwatch as assigned." "Don't downplay this," Hendricks said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I've read your file, Grant, top of your class at sniper school, consistently highest scores in marksmanship. But scores on a range don't tell me about character, about what happens when the bullets are flying and men's lives hang in the balance." He glanced at Morrison. "Commander, you want to add anything?" Morrison stepped forward, and Riley noticed he'd changed into a fresh uniform, though he moved carefully due to his injuries. "Sir, I need to state for the record that I initially doubted Staff Sergeant Grant's inclusion on this mission. I thought she'd be a liability." His eyes met Riley's. "I was catastrophically wrong. When my team was pinned down, out of ammunition, with wounded, facing 40-plus hostiles, Staff Sergeant Grant single-handedly turned the tide of battle. She didn't just engage the enemy. She systematically dismantled their entire force with a level of precision and skill I've never witnessed in 20 years of special operations." Hendricks nodded slowly. "I'm recommending you for the Silver Star, Staff Sergeant. Your actions tonight meet every criterion: gallantry in action, distinguished conduct, and heroism in the face of the enemy." Riley felt the weight of those words. The Silver Star, the 3rd highest military decoration for valor. She thought about the 26 men who died so 6 could live. Was that heroism or just mathematics? "Thank you, sir," she managed. "I'm honored, but those SEALs fought like lions. Chief Torres, Petty Officer Reeves, all of them, they deserve the same recognition." "They're getting it," Hendricks assured her. "But right now we're talking about you. This goes beyond military decorations, Grant. What you did tonight will be studied, analyzed. You've set a new standard for what's possible in combat marksmanship." The debriefing lasted another 40 minutes. Detailed questions about her positioning, shot selection, ammunition expenditure, equipment performance. Riley answered each query with professional precision, but part of her mind was elsewhere, thinking about the bodies in that valley, the SEALs recovering in medical, the weight of what she'd done. Finally, Hendricks dismissed her. "Get some rest, Staff Sergeant, and that's an order, you've earned it." As Riley left the TOC, Morrison caught up with her. "Hey, the guys are waiting for you. We've got a bottle of decent whiskey someone's mother sent from home. Nothing fancy, but," he shrugged, "we'd like you to join us." Riley followed Morrison across the base to a cramped hooch where the SEAL team lived between missions. Inside, the space was sparse but personalized. Photos of families on plywood walls, gear hanging from nails, a battered coffee maker that looked older than most of the operators. Tors, Tiny, and Reeves were there, along with two other SEALs Riley hadn't met, the team's communications specialist and breacher, who'd been on a different operation tonight. Ghost was still in medical but had sent word that he'd be rejoining them soon. "The hero arrives," Tors announced, gesturing Riley to a folding chair someone had set up. "Sit, drink, and prepare to be embarrassed because we're about to talk about you like you're a legend." Riley sat, accepting a canteen cup with 2 fingers of whiskey. The liquid burned going down, but it was a good burn, warming her from the inside out. "To Staff Sergeant Riley Grant," Morrison raised his cup, "who proved that guardian angels exist, and sometimes they carry M110s and have scary good aim." "To Riley," the others echoed, drinking. For the next 2 hours, Riley sat among these warriors and listened as they recounted the battle from their perspective. The desperation when they realized they were trapped, the confusion when enemy fighters started dropping, the awe when they understood what was happening. "I've never been so glad to be wrong about someone," Tors admitted, refilling Riley's cup. "When you walked into that briefing room, I thought, great, another person we have to babysit. Instead, you babysat us, and we're alive because of it." Reeves, his shoulder bandaged but his spirits high, leaned forward. "Ma'am, can I ask, what was going through your head when you were taking those shots?" Riley considered the question carefully. "Honestly, nothing. That probably sounds strange, but when I'm behind the scope, there's no thinking. Just seeing, calculating, executing. It's like the rifle and I become one thing with one purpose." She paused. "The thinking comes after. That's when it gets hard." The room fell quiet, understanding passing between them. These men knew about the after, the nightmares, the memories that surfaced at unexpected moments, the weight of taking human life even when it was necessary and justified. "You'll carry it," Morrison said quietly. "The weight of those 26. We all carry our kills. But you'll also carry the knowledge that 6 of your brothers are alive, that hundreds of civilians will see tomorrow because of what you did." He met her eyes. "That's not nothing, Riley." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and somehow that felt more significant than any medal or commendation. Tiny raised his cup again. "You know what? Forget the trident pin. You don't need our symbols. You've got something better. You've got our respect, our trust, our friendship." He grinned despite his pain medication. "Which means you're stuck with us now. Hope you're ready for that." Riley looked around at these men, warriors who'd been strangers 12 hours ago and were now something more. Brothers in arms, forged in the crucible of combat. They doubted her, yes, but when it mattered, they'd called for help and trusted her to answer. And she had. "I'm ready," Riley said, raising her cup. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." As dawn began to paint the eastern sky with pale light, Riley sat among her new brothers, trading stories, sharing silence, and understanding that some bonds were forged in fire and would never break. Dawn broke over forward operating base rampart in shades of amber and gold, painting the Afghan mountains with light that seemed too beautiful for a place that had seen so much violence. Riley stood on the observation deck behind the operations building, her hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. She hadn't slept, hadn't even tried. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw crosshairs and heat signatures and bodies falling. 26 men. The number had carved itself into her consciousness. Behind her, the base was coming alive. Morning formations, equipment checks, the grinding routine of military life that continued regardless of what happened the night before. But Riley stood apart from it all, watching the mountains where it had happened, where she'd become something she wasn't sure she wanted to be. "A legend. Figured I'd find you here," Morrison's voice came from behind her. He moved carefully, his ribs still protesting, and joined her at the railing. For a long moment, they stood in silence, 2 warriors watching the sunrise over a land that had broken so many before them. "Can't sleep?" Morrison asked finally. "Don't want to," Riley admitted. When I close my eyes, I see them, all of them. Morrison nodded, understanding. That's the price we pay, the price of being good at what we do. He paused. You know Ghost is going to make a full recovery. Doctors say another few minutes and he would have bled out, but he didn't, because you bought us time. Riley took a sip of cold coffee, grimacing at the taste. How do you do it, Commander? How do you carry this and still function? Morrison considered the question carefully. You remember why you did it, not the act itself, the killing, but the purpose behind it. You didn't shoot 26 people. You saved 6 lives. You stopped a terrorist cell. You prevented an attack that would have killed hundreds of civilians. He turned to face her. The men you killed made their choices. They chose violence. They chose to try to murder American soldiers. You didn't create that situation. You just ended it. Does it get easier? Riley asked. No, Morrison said honestly, but you get stronger. You learn to carry the weight without letting it crush you, and you lean on your brothers and sisters who understand. He gestured back toward the base. That's why we wanted you with us last night, not just to celebrate, though you sure as hell deserved that, but to let you know you're not alone in this. Riley felt something loosen in her chest. The isolation she'd felt, the weight of being the only one who understood what she'd done. Morrison was right. She wasn't alone. She had brothers now. Real ones, forged in fire. Thank you, she said quietly, for waiting at the LZ. You could have left. Morrison's expression was fierce. We don't leave family behind, and that's what you are now, whether you wear a trident or not. Family. Over the next week, Riley fell into a strange new rhythm. The Silver Star recommendation moved through channels with unprecedented speed. Intelligence officers interviewed her extensively, building profiles of her engagement tactics. Marksmanship instructors requested permission to study her methods. The story of the female sniper who'd eliminated 26 enemy fighters spread beyond the base, becoming legend even as Riley tried to maintain her anonymity. Ghost recovered faster than expected, demanding to be released from medical 3 days early. When Riley visited him, he'd grinned through his pain medication and said, I owe you my life. That's not a debt I'll forget, ma'am. Torres started a tradition. Every morning at dawn, he'd find Riley wherever she was and hand her a cup of coffee. They rarely spoke, but the gesture said everything that needed saying. We see you. We value you. You're one of us. The official ceremony came 2 weeks later. Colonel Hendricks pinned the Silver Star on Riley's chest in front of the entire base formation. The citation read, for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States while serving as Overwatch sniper during a combat extraction operation. Staff Sergeant Grant's extraordinary heroism, professional skill, and decisive action under fire resulted in the preservation of friendly forces and the successful completion of the mission. Her actions reflect great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army. Riley stood at attention throughout the ceremony, her face impassive, but inside she felt the weight of every word. The applause from hundreds of soldiers echoed across the base. Morrison and his entire SEAL team stood in the front row, and when the ceremony concluded, Torres was the first to shake her hand. Proud of you, sister, he said simply. That afternoon, Riley received orders. She was being reassigned, not away from Afghanistan, but to a specialized unit that would work exclusively with Special Operations Forces. Her skills were too valuable, her record too exceptional, to waste on routine missions. Morrison found her packing her gear in her quarters that evening. So you're leaving us, he said, leaning against the doorframe. New assignment, Riley confirmed, rolling her uniforms with military precision. Looks like someone decided I'm useful after all. You were always useful. We were just too stupid to see it at first. Morrison pulled out a small box and handed it to her. The team wanted you to have this. Riley opened it to find a custom challenge coin. One side bore the SEAL trident. The other was engraved with crosshairs, the number 26, and the words Guardian Angel, Koringal Valley. We had them made special, Morrison explained. Only 7 exist, one for each team member and one for you. You're part of the team now, Grant. Distance doesn't change that. Riley felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. Thank you, she managed, for everything, for trusting me, for teaching me what it means to be part of something bigger than myself. Morrison extended his hand. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call, day or night. We answer when family calls. Riley shook his hand, then surprised them both by pulling him into a brief embrace. Same goes for you, Commander. Anytime, anywhere. 3 days later, Riley stood on the tarmac, preparing to board a transport that would take her to her new assignment. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant purples and oranges. She thought about the valley, about the 26 men who'd died there, about the 6 who'd lived. She thought about the weight she'd carry forever and the strength she'd found to bear it. Her rifle case was slung over her shoulder, the same M110 that had saved 6 lives and ended 26 others. It was cleaned, oiled, zeroed, and ready, just like her. As the transport's engines roared to life, Riley took one last look at Fob Rampart. Somewhere in the medical facility, Ghost was probably charming nurses and ignoring doctors' orders. Somewhere in the team hooch, Tors was brewing terrible coffee and telling stories. Somewhere on mission, Morrison was leading his men with the quiet competence that defined true leadership. And somewhere out there, beyond these mountains, other warriors would face their own desperate moments. Other soldiers would find themselves trapped, outgunned, calling for help in the darkness. Riley Grant would be there when they called. Not for glory, not for medals, not for recognition. Because that's what guardians do. They answer, they protect, they bring their brothers and sisters home. The transport lifted off, carrying Riley toward whatever came next. But part of her would always remain in that valley, on that rocky ridge, looking through a scope at impossible odds, and deciding that impossible just meant she had to be better. She'd been better that night, and she'd be better the next time someone needed her. The mountains of Afghanistan faded into the distance below, ancient and indifferent to the small human dramas played out in their shadows. But Riley Grant wasn't indifferent. She carried the weight of 26 lives, the gratitude of 6 warriors, and the knowledge that when it mattered most, she'd been exactly where she needed to be. A quiet professional, a guardian angel, a warrior who understood that true heroism doesn't announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. It simply shows up when desperate voices whisper for help in the darkness. And answers. Always. The end.